but not least. So, as everybody knows here, it's really great event. I learned a lot, and there's a great food for thought. Online, we can say there's hate speech, and offline, there's harm and consequence. So how can we address the issue? And I myself is a lawyer, and we cannot rely on law. And today, it's my honor also to bring brilliant speakers from other disciplines. How about other communication, media, journalists? So we are very keen to learn from them, how from their perspective, and explore and address the global challenge. So at the panel, I just leave time to Dr. Kezban. So it's your floor, please.
Yeah. Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Kezban Karagoz. My presentation is about journalism in exile, resistance and the vulnerability under digital hate speech. We talk about with some Turkish journalists about to navigate the dual realities of resistance and the vulnerability in increasing the hostile digital environment shaped by the authoritarian populist politics. Following the Gezi protest and after the 2016 coup attempt in Turkey, an authoritarian turn in Turkey, and then we focus on the after these dates. Drawing on the semi-structured interview with journalists in exile in the European country and Canada, and Sweden, Germany, and Denmark, and totally Canada. And this research explores how digital hate speech, traditional representation, and online harassment affect their professional process and practice, and emotional well-being and democratic function. And context that can, new journalism a little bit a different case. They have to, and the new media technology of a new digital technology and the social media, and the new case for the new journalist in the exile. And before the exile time, they had to and the self-team and the self-company organization. But after the exile process, they have to only and one person in a self-room, of sometimes in the house, of at the street. Before this time, in the July 15 and 2016, there was a lot of biggest media company in Turkey. But after this time, a lot of media company is closed by regime from Erdogan. And after this time, and Erdogan harassment go there as a specifically and personally. And then this study focused on how hate speech turns into digital, sometimes the physical violence against the exiled journalists in Europe and other countries. And this populist and authoritarian discourse how go there and harass their life. And territorial background is a little bit give us that. And freedom speech and hate speech is so near to them, because in the populist authoritarian regime in Turkey and a long history of weak democratic culture. And the authoritarian practice is inside of the other, after the Gezi, and especially in the 2016, we say that the OHAL period. And the journalism in exile, that was this after the process is a so polarized and for social area in Turkey. And the Turkey agent of Turkish officials say that they are not journalists, they are terrorists, they are traitors, they are çapulcu, they are FETÖ agents. So that. But we can see this article, and the article say that what is the right for the freedom speech. The act is the unreasonable likely is all the circumstances to often insult, humiliate, intimidate other person or a group of person. This is so important. And we can see that, and a lot of journalists moved to European country of other America of other North country, but at the same time, hate speech turns into digital area and sometimes physical violence against exiled journalists. And how digital platforms are stimulatory space of resistance and tools of authoritarian populist discourse and harassment. This is of case. And we can see there, and this case about in Africa. In Africa, we can see an Tigran community. They became an hate speech area, and we say that the hate tax. And generally, we can use as a human rights perspective, and the tax is a so convenient thing for the new media technology, because we can so fastly our target. But same time as authoritarian regime used this same technique for this mobility. And hashtag convenient to the hate tax. In Turkey, case is itself in there. And maybe in Africa, some people and group people seeing there as an yes, it's a snake of an animal. And in Turkey, we can see that an in-group person seeing that as a virus of an maybe as a health problem of others. And this is so specifically in Turkey. But not only from the government officials, and some other journalists helped our officials form some influential narrative agents. Maybe here, they write about they are not journalists, they are an agent, they are an crypto agent, so that. And they use some hate tags on Twitter, on other social media channel of account. And we can see that there's some women journalists in Turkey, and the women only online harassment is framed as a part of the broader extreme discourse that can spill over the offline violence and the gendered and intersectional dimension over the woman. And we method, and we have some specific interview with some important journalists from Turkey. They live in the other democratic country now, and 7 semi-structured interview with the exile journalist, and one woman only. Why only one woman? Maybe later we can see about. And the snowball technique is our technique. We talk about the first 2 journalists from Turkey in exile, and then later we talk about the other 5 journalists. And new habitat, we talk about that. Journalists go there abroad from the main country, but they continue their other function in European country, human rights, of NGO work, of other right organization, this Armenian diaspora, of Kurdish diaspora. They have other contact in new country, of hostile country. Maybe you can there and the justice delay it, and they go there in some protest organization in European country. And here is the slavery cell from Can Dündar. They continue to talk about their main country in Europe as in exile. And maybe some cases are so difficult in Turkey. Maybe these children stay there with their mother in prison, but nobody write about in Turkey. But exile journalists from Europe in Sevinç Özaslan talk about this case and write about this problem, not afraid of this. And other journalist is the Metin Cihan, write about some ship of some that is transporting case, and this transporting from other country to in Israel, and these ships from the son von Erdogan. This is so big case, so big effect on Turkey. People, but nobody write about this case in Turkey. Only in exile journalists write about this, and then they target from regime von Erdogan, and they change the roles. Yes, this role is a little bit emotional. From exile journalists, they became a refugee and immigrant person, and this is so big vulnerability for journalists because they have a so popular person of so this is an important person in Turkey as a journalist, but in the new country nobody know that. A big problem for them. And this the last case from regime is the long arm Erdogan. The regime uses a self long arm in European country. You can go to the European country of other country, but this effect continue on the exile journalists. This is so big problem, and the regime agent use the YouTube channel. Regime agent use the other troll of both account. And the example. And the first example about with Levent Kenes, he's an chef editor in Turkey, and he's an exile journalist in Sweden. He has a lot of problem from the regime and Erdogan, and politically and process for NATO with Sweden. They talk about a lot of time about Levent Kenes. And Erdogan want to Levent Kenes from the Sweden, especially Sweden. But fortunately, that cannot be. And solidarity from the international organization help him. And Bülent Kenes is other example, and he's a chef editor of English newspaper in Turkey. And maybe because of that, he became a target from regime for Erdogan. And today's Zaman published in English, and which has made it a very influential opposition publication. And Erdogan and want to again and Bülent Kenes from Sweden. And Hasan Cucuk is the other journalist. He's a net exile journalist. First of all, he was a diaspora journalist, but after the 2016, he became of exile journalist because he can not go there Turkey officially, and Erdogan wanted him from the Denmark. And Hayko Bağdat is an Armenian background journalist in Turkey. He lives all-time Turkey, but he's an Armenian background. And he moved to Berlin, but a lot of time he gets a lot of harassment risk in Berlin. And then this is so important, this picture. He took the statue wearing in the bulletproof vest because there's so high level risk for Hayko Bağdat from the Turkish community in Berlin. The other case is the Sevinç Özaslan. Sevinç is a woman journalist, and maybe This is so important for us because a lot of women journalists now continue their job in exile. Sevinç, she can that, and but as a woman, Sevinç get a lot of a sexual harassment attack from the digitally from the actors of bots, and this is so stressful for her. And Sevinç talk about and write about the children, women, and some other oppositor person in Turkey. This is so big problem for the regime. But before, Sevinç write about only is art and culture news. The time is not problem for Sevinç Özaslan, but after this case, she write about some women, some children, and KHK person, and this is begin and so big problem from the regime. And the Said Sefa is the last case. He live in the Canada, and Canada is so far away from Turkey, but he has a lot of digital harassment message and physical harassment message. And the last case we talk about this person. They have a little bit free, and they have a self freedom in the new country, but they focus on only is before the main country case, and they have a limited connection with the new diaspora of a new other connect, and they need a new contact and digital contact of digital diaspora's contact in the new land, new country. This is my the last case. This was. Thank you.
Thank you, Kezban. I think whether there's any pressing question, only one question. So then we turn to the second speaker. Any pressing question? Yeah. Oh, right. Very corner, please. Gentlemen. Yeah.
If we look at these journalists, this exiled journalists will live in Europe now, for example, the last case, what is the case for the gendered hate speech that she receives actually? This you need the microphone. Do we need the microphone? Yeah. Yes. Sorry. So, from these case studies, so there are many different interesting cases actually, but the last case, Sevinç Özaslan, I think that's one thing is coming from only the female journalist. Does she receive any gender type of hate speech, for example, of what type of hate?
Yeah, this is a sexual harassment message from the bots of actoral accounts. And this is also a lot from the personal message box of a mail of other things. And she said that I'm so afraid of sometimes this message, and I can go there, my house, my pet is so darkness. And yeah, I know this message is sometimes the only message, but maybe sometimes not, you know. And as a woman, this is so big, horrible things, maybe. And every day, not only one day, and specifically, and continue. This is so stressful for a journalist, woman journalist. And this is a sexual harassment message is so stressful for her.
Can you also analyze these networks of these hateful speech?
Hateful speech, yeah.
Can you analyze this?
Yeah,
Network,
they need a new network, but they focus on only in the main country, and they have a so limited time, so limited energy, and so limited maybe network for a new country. They need a new country connect because of their account is closed by the regime, but the regime bot accounts speak about them. Still, but they can not write about for him or for other message. This is a big problem because a regime van Erdogan talk about with Elon Musk of Google of YouTube account managers, But this journalists used this area and these platforms. But yeah, that is who somebody said that this is not legal. This is not this is not true for this journalist.
Thank you, Kezban. I think maybe more questions will come. So we talk about journalism. Then, so how about the disinformation targeting minorities? So we know like we could go with the legal remedies, but from Professor Sentí Navarro and University of Valencia, I think it's your floor. We are looking forward to learn from you. Thank you. It's your floor.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Good afternoon, everyone. Firstly, I would like to thank to the organizers for making possible the celebration of this event and all of the attendants for coming to this session. And today I would like to address a phenomenon that sits between the intersection of technology, democracy, and human rights, which is the rise of prejudiced disinformation. I will structure my presentation in 3 parts. Firstly, I will address how the digital public sphere has been transformed. Secondly, I will explain what do I understand by prejudiced disinformation and what kind of harms does it produce. And thirdly, I will talk about some regulatory responses given mainly in the European context. And I would like to reflect about some democratic responses that could be needed. So, to address, before entering the core argument, I will address the transformation of the digital public sphere as a prerequisite that has triggered the rise of prejudiced disinformation. In this sense, we are witnessing a profound reconfiguration of the digital public space. The expansion of the internet, the consolidation of social networks, and the rise of platform governance has altered the way information is produced, disseminated, and consumed. So, what used to be a predominantly linear communicative model led by journalists, public broadcasters, or editors has become a decentralized network where any user can generate, edit, or amplify any content. Immediacy, hyperconnectivity, and information overload are now defining characteristics of the environment, often prioritizing virality and speed over verification and accuracy. This has immediate effects over the quality of the information that we are consuming. At the same time, technological design increasingly shapes the information ecosystem. The use of big data, algorithmic curation, and artificial intelligence have redefined how information is selected, prioritized, and also encountered. Algorithms decide what we see, in which order, and with what intensity. And visibility, once a byproduct of editorial selection, is now determined rather by engagement metrics, virality, and predictive models. The consequence is that information circulates through personalized pathways, creating fragmented and asymmetrical informational realities. This has produced a combined phenomenon of de-intermediation and re-intermediation, where traditional gatekeepers lose their centrality and new private intermediators acquire unprecedented influence. Jack Balkin's theory of the digital infrastructure of free speech illustrates this transformation well. He argues that while platforms perform functions that are private in nature, they resemble constitutional roles. Through their algorithmic systems that remain largely opaque, platform governance increasingly shapes the conditions under which public opinion is formed. These algorithmic dynamics are further intensified by artificial intelligence. Automated systems generate, filter, and recommend content at a scale that exceeds human capacities. And recommendation mechanisms reinforce pre-existing preferences, contributing to the formation of echo chambers and filter bubbles. Within such environments, with emotionally charged and identity-driven narratives can overshadow factual accuracy, fueling polarization and undermining the shared frameworks of meaning on which democratic dialogue depends. It is within this transformed environment that disinformation disorders gain relevance. In my work, I follow the influential typology of Claire Wardo and Jose Interaction, who distinguish between misinformation, malinformation, and disinformation. This framework is adequate, in my opinion, as it avoids conflating accidental inaccuracies with intentional manipulation. And my focus is precisely on disinformation because of its intentional nature and because of its distinctive capacity to disrupt democratic processes. Therefore, I understand the rise of disinformation is not a random anomaly, but a consequence of the structure of the digital ecosystem. Immediacy, algorithmic amplification, attention-driven design, anonymization, and the economic incentives of targeted advertising create ideal conditions for these manipulative practices. As Hannah Arendt reminded us, this is not new. Deception has always accompanied politics, but what today is new is the scale, the speed, and the precision with which disinformation can now operate. From this perspective, disinformation is not only a communication problem, but a structural threat to democratic systems that depend on a free and informed public opinion and on the bonds of trust that sustain it. So within this transformed sphere, public sphere, where information disorders thrive, one of the most damaging types is prejudiced disinformation, which in my paper I define, or I understand, as the intentional creation or dissemination of false or misleading narratives portraying minority or vulnerable groups as dangerous, inferior, or socially corrosive. The specificity of this definition or this concept of prejudiced disinformation lies in two combined dimensions. Firstly, on the intentional manipulation, and secondly, on the targeting of groups with long histories of marginalization, or not so long histories of marginalization, but this characteristic. However, these narratives often exploit slurs and, often avoid slurs and they rely on insinuation instead. Stereotype activation or emotionally charged framing or fabricated events that appear plausible. Because of this indirect style, many forms of prejudiced disinformation fall outside traditional or regulatory definitions of hate speech, which makes them harder to address and makes them easier to spread in the information ecosystem. When coming to the harms that these type of narratives can create, I distinguish between two. Firstly, the direct harm and the structural harm. When I talk about the direct harm, I refer to this harm that is produced immediately and with tangible effects for the targeted communities. In this sense, it increases, this would be a more obvious type of harm, and it's obvious that it increases discriminatory attitudes and social hostility. Empirical evidence in this sense shows correlations between spikes in online hate crimes and offline hate, in online hate and offline hate crimes. The causal pathways are different and complex, but the trend is clear. When a group is identified as the other and as a threatening other, some individuals can eventually act on these groups, demonizing them with demonizing narratives, with vandalism, or with assaults, or even worse. In addition, falsehoods about minorities have other direct harms, such as fostering exclusionary public policies, especially during moments of crisis. Moreover, these narratives could also isolate minority groups eventually. This direct harm, is multidimensional, and it affects safety, their dignity, their social standing, and also their access to equal participation. However, the deeper and often more long-term consequential harm is the structural one. Prejudiced disinformation in this sense erodes the democratic infrastructure that relies on informed and informed public debate, pluralistic dialogue, social cohesion, and trust in institutions. Prejudiced disinformation distorts political agendas by shifting attention away from real issues and towards fabricated fears. And it fuels polarization, reinforcing echo chambers, as stated before. It also undermines institutional legitimacy by suggesting that authorities or mainstream media may deliberately hide the truth about minority groups. And in this sense, this fosters further further undermining of social cohesion and could even diminish the respect for rule of law. In addition, this type of disinformation is weaponized to mobilize voters through fear and resentment. Electoral cycles tend to coincide with misleading narratives against minorities. Sometimes it's even a mechanism of external influence strategies, known as the hybrid strategies, to fuel polarization, undermine social cohesion, and destabilize democratic systems. So the idea is that the harms of prejudiced disinformation go beyond the direct harm that it creates for specific groups and affects beyond the democratic systems as a whole. So when coming to the responses, and I will try to be brief in this sense, in the European context, the European Court of Human Rights has already drawn clear boundaries around extreme hate speech. I won't go further on with this because we have already talked about European Court of Human Rights pronouncements in other sessions. However, I would like to remark that there are clear boundaries even when there is no direct incitement to violence. The key instrument in the European Union had been, until 2008, the Framework Decision on Racism and Xenophobia, which required member states to criminalize incitement to hatred, establishing a common baseline, outlawing racist and xenophobic expressions across the European Union. Alongside binding law, the EU had relied for years on soft law and co-regulatory instruments, such as the Code of Conduct on countering illegal hate speech online, followed by later the Code of Practice of Disinformation. These voluntary initiatives encourage platforms to remove illegal content and illegal hate speech content in brief periods of time. They try to demonetize disinformation actors and mechanisms and disable fake accounts and automated amplification mechanisms. However, their voluntary nature and their limited transparency have raised concerns regarding accountability and democratic oversight. Recognizing these shortcomings, the adoption of the Digital Service Act in 2022 marked a significant shift towards a more systemic and binding regulatory approach. The DSA imposes specific obligations on very large online platforms and very large online search engines to assess and mitigate systemic risks, including risks associated to the dissemination of illegal content, hate speech, and disinformation that may affect democratic values. It introduces enhanced transparency requirements regarding content moderation practices and recommendation systems, supervisory mechanisms at both national and European levels, and avenues for user participation through notice and action procedures. However, when speaking about regulation, I recognize that it's necessary but insufficient. The fact is that without complementary measures addressing design choices, economic incentives, and power asymmetries, In the digital public sphere, legal responses alone cannot fully counter the democratic harms produced by this type of disinformation. So to respond adequately against disinformation and online hate speech, it is necessary to move beyond this purely reactive approach towards a more towards creating democratic resilience. Prejudice disinformation doesn't operate only through unlawful content, but it is, as I stated at the beginning, deeply embedded in the functioning and in the dynamics of the information ecosystems. For this reason, I understand content moderation itself is insufficient, and excessively strict regulatory responses have the risk of generating chilling effects, encouraging platforms to over-remove content, which sometimes may be lawful, in order to minimize legal exposure. In addition, anonymity and the cross-border nature of digital communication complicates the attribution of responsibilities. So I argue that some mechanisms of identification when speaking online could be applied in order to protect or to foster this responsibility distribution online. At the same time, I focus or give some attention to new ideas that are emerging in the academic sphere, which argue that if the algorithmic amplification or if algorithms have the power to alter the conditions in which public opinion is formed, focusing on them can help to mitigate this type of disorders. I refer myself to the middleware softwares. This refers or would this would draw an intermediate layer of independent intermediaries that operate between users and platforms, allowing users to use or choose their alternative systems to filter, rank, or contextualize their content that they would like to receive. The underlying idea beneath this is to reduce the societal impact of the recommender algorithms used by larger platforms. And although I also recognize that this idea is still in a theoretical sphere, middleware solutions are useful to think about a way of empowering users, of enhancing transparency online, and also fostering pluralism. Within this, and to finish, within this broader framework, effective responses, I argue, should combine technological, legal, and educational measures. They should include strengthening the platform accountability through transparency and independent solutions should definitely go through investing in digital literacy and public awareness. Investment should go also on supporting minority communities through monitoring and reporting mechanisms. And to conclude, understanding prejudice disinformation as part of wider strategies of electoral and democratic manipulation and foreign interference. And to finish, crucially, I would like to say that crucially, none of the measures that I have stated are sufficient if we think of them in an isolated way, and addressing prejudice disinformation requires sustained coordination and collaboration between EU authorities, EU institutions, national authorities too, digital platforms, and civil society. And that's everything. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Carla, and for your insights and analysis. And also, you And also, you just recommend and also try to find solutions to address the issue. So excellent. Now, as usual, any pressing question? Just one question before.
Thank you for a very interesting presentation. I know it's a bit hard to answer these questions, but since it's the area of your work, I really like to hear your opinion. Would you say that nowadays in the modern world, disinformation poses even greater threats to society than hate speech because of it's so easily spreadable and so hard to control, and prejudiced information is so easily believed by the people and they do not even check if it's actually true or not. What do you think about that?
So, yes, this is a very difficult answer for me to a very difficult question for me to answer. I would say they are separate but intertwined phenomenons. I wouldn't say one is more important than other because disinformation affects different spheres of life, and certainly it helps hate speech to increase or to become even a greater problem. So I would say one affects the other. I wouldn't say it's more important than hate speech. However, from my personal point of view, my main focus in my PhD is disinformation. So I would probably have more arguments to say that it is a more serious problem, but only because of the fact that I'm more informed about disinformation than about hate speech itself. But I don't know if I have answered it correctly. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the question. So let's move to, as we just said, hate speech is like a societal cancer. It's a global challenge. So we need multidisciplinary to address the issue. And also we need more research tools. We need maybe more research methodologies. So now let's move to next speaker, who would like to explore how fact-checking as a research tool to tackle hate speech. So we are really curious. And yeah. So now, Juliana, so it's your floor.
Thank you so much, and good afternoon, everyone. So, thank you for the PowerPoint presentation. So my presentation, as just mentioned, is going to address how can we use or should we use fact checkers as a tool to tackle hate speech, and it's systematic literature review. So I'm not bringing necessarily any new empirical data. I'm just revising the data that is out there and putting that in a systematic framework. I'm going to start by giving you a bit of a background into this research, and I think the background answers a bit of the last question that we just had, which is misinformation and hate speech. So first things first, I acknowledge that misinformation and hate speech, they are different phenomena. But as we just mentioned, they are intertwined. So there are some populist and hate narratives online that spread, and they're used, basically they're misinformation being used to support or fuel hate speech. So they are exactly in the middle, in between hate speech and misinformation. And then this research assumes that if fact checkers are a valuable tool to tackle misinformation, then potentially they are also a valuable tool to tackle both populist hate narratives and, as a side effect, also hate speech. But before going into the evidence on this, I'm going to take a step back and then ask you a question, a very important one. Who are fact checkers? Would you say that Trump, whenever he raises his finger and says, this is fake news, is Trump a fact checker? I was slightly turned by the answer. Yes, he is not. So I'm going to take you just briefly through the history of fact checkers so that you can understand where we were and where are we going and why does this research matters. So in the early 90s and, late 90s and early 2000s, fact checkers were basically journalists, mainly in the US, but not only in the US, And their whole mission was basically to hold politicians accountable for their actions. But, as my colleague just mentioned, we now live in the age of information disorder. So we don't have journalists only as the gatekeepers of information. Information is everywhere. Everyone produces information all of the time. So then fact checkers became actually everyone, not only journalists themselves, but also some new initiatives and some activists even, in what the literature calls the debunking turn from the 2010 onwards. The debunking turn is very remarkable because in 2015, fact-checkers came together and they formed an alliance, which we call the IFCN, so the Information Fact-Checking Network. And in 2016, Meta partnered with the IFCN and decided that they were going to fund some fact-checking initiatives, the ones who were affiliated with the IFCN. So from 2016 until January this year, we've seen a proliferation of fact-checking initiatives, and other social media platforms also started funding these kinds of initiatives everywhere in the world. And it's really interesting to see that like some fact-checking, especially in the global south, they are entirely funded by Meta or by other platforms. However, in January 2025, I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but there has been an announcement by Meta, by Mark Zuckerberg actually, in which he basically said that he was going to be scaling down these collaborations between Meta and fact-checking companies in the US. So this is rolling up only in the US by now, but of course fact-checkers around the world, they're really concerned. Basically, what Meta said was that they're going back to their roots to preserve freedom of expression, and that fact-checkers were censoring speech on Meta, which is really interesting because I don't know if you're familiar with how the 3PFC works, but basically, Meta just gives the fact-checkers a dashboard with a lot of content, and then the fact-checkers go and choose which content to fact-check. They send back the fact-check to Meta, and Meta is the one who decides what to do with that fact check. If they're going to remove the content or if they're going to put a label and demote the content. But in any case, it is not for the fact checkers to remove this content. It is for Meta to decide what to do. In any case, Mark Zuckerberg was like, no, let's go back to our roots. No more 3PFC in the US. And all of the fact checkers are worried worldwide now. So this is a bit of the background and the context. Now let's move on to the research question and methods of this study. I don't know what happened. Okay, good. So research question. The guiding research question on this work was, what is the literature from 2015, when the IFCN was created and when we started to see these collaborations between platforms, until 2025 report about how collaborations between fact-checkers and platforms are associated with the prevalence of populist hate narratives? I, as I said, employed a systematic literature review, so I've just reviewed a lot of papers that were published from 2015 to 2025 this year, and I've analyzed three thematic issues. So first of all, the relationship between hate speech and disinformation, because we assume that there is a relationship, but I don't know what the literature says or what evidence do they have. Second, the role of fact-checkers in tackling hate speech. And third, the role of platforms in facilitating or curbing the dissemination of hateful narratives. Particularly, because I don't know what's going on with the microphone, but okay, I hope I'm still audible. Okay, cool. So this third question is particularly important because, as we've seen this scaling down on the US, we can try to understand what is going to happen from now on, now that this collaboration is no longer in place and might actually be extended around the world. So for the data collection, I went on Scalpels, and I know that there are other databases, but for time limitation I couldn't look into all of the existing databases on the literature, but I went on Scalpels and I performed 13 searches with keywords that you see over there.
And then I identified more than 3,000 papers. I freaked out initially, but I removed some duplicates, and I screened some records basically for their abstract and for their title. I ended up with 51 papers, which is still a lot if you think about that. I was doing this alone basically, and I read all 51 of them, and I excluded 19 because basically they did not help me with any of the 3 thematic items that I just told you about. So there were some papers, for instance, on misinformation and COVID, but they did not deal with hate speech itself, so they were not helping me in any way. Some of them didn't assess at all the platform relationships. They were just talking theoretically about hate speech, so that was not very useful either. But in any case, I ended up still with 32 papers, and here are the conclusions about them. So first finding, there are numerous studies recognizing the connections between disinformation, hate speech, radicalization, and polarization. So that was a success. I was really happy to see it was an assumption, but it was also supported by the existing literature. There were some papers that acknowledged the importance of fact-checking or fact-checking techniques, not necessarily the fact-checkers themselves, in tackling misinformation and hateful content online. One of the papers was really interesting because it was a model, and in the model, the authors inserted some fact-checking techniques to see how the content was going to disseminate or not. So although they didn't acknowledge the importance of fact-checkers, they acknowledged the importance of fact-checking techniques, which is good enough already. Second finding that I had was on the role of platforms in disseminating or curbing hate narratives. And I forgot to mention, but I had both theoretical papers and empirical papers, a lot of papers in computer science employing different models, but the literature overwhelmingly pointed to a link between the platform's business models and the dissemination of hateful messages, as we've heard a lot today. So, for instance, Moon in 2024, he said that humans are emotional beings. They're often acting driven by personal and or moral values rather than by objective evidence, and online platforms in turn capture and amplify this emotion through algorithms that privilege controversial or attention-seeking content, including populist and hate narratives. Another really interesting study was from Aurora et al. So the authors basically analyzed the terms and content of 42 platforms, terms of service, of 42 platforms, and they found that all of these terms of service addressed hate speech, yet 10 of them did not say anything about misinformation. So clearly there was a bit of an imbalance there. Platforms are seemingly concerned with the spread of hate speech, but not necessarily with misinformation. And then in Sahid et al. From 2024, he also found that platforms were indicating to fact-checking initiatives which kind of content they wanted to be fact-checked. So these were the main findings, and they lead me to 2 conclusions, basically. So although I found a lot of theoretical and empirical evidence that platforms play a central role in enabling or restraining populist hate narratives through their algorithms, terms and conditions, and business model in general, I found no papers examining the relationship between platforms and their collaborations with fact-checking, especially on the effects of such collaborations in curbing or enabling harmful speech. So there is a gap in the literature. If anyone wants to undertake this research, especially through a theoretical, empirical lenses, now's the time before they take down all of the partnerships with the fact-checking community. And having had these somewhat frustrating results, especially the second one, I decided to extrapolate the results of my study a bit to try to go to broader conclusions on the topic. So one of the most interesting papers that I found was from Budek et al. In 2024. Basically what they showed is that there was not a huge prevalence of hate speech for every single user. Instead, platforms were kind of removing hateful speech, but they were still showing hateful content for users who seek it out. So the more you were interested in hateful messages or in a particular topic, the more you were going to see this kind of hateful message. And considering especially this result, my conclusion is that fact-checking initiatives should contribute to avoiding further radicalization, especially of these users who actively look for this kind of content. So they could be deployed when radicalization is starting to happen. The degree of this efficiency of fact-checking initiatives, however, is still disputed. So Moon, again in 2024, basically said that the collaborations depend on engagement with users' emotional and cognitive biases. And another caveat that is not on the slide, but it's also really important, is that some of these collaborations, they have very strict rules. So for instance, fact-checkers cannot fact-check political content on Meta. They are completely restricted from doing so. So of course there's another caveat that also limits the efficacy of such collaborations between platforms and fact-checking initiatives. And then lastly, I extrapolated that to a legal and policy perspective, because you mentioned that we were going to listen from different perspectives, not necessarily from lawyers, but I'm a lawyer, so I had to do it. It was stronger than me. So considering these results, what I concluded is that hate speech laws should account for fact-checking initiatives in tackling hate speech, and states' normative frameworks and policies should incentivize this kinds of collaboration, especially now that we're seeing a scaling down on these collaborations. And more importantly, these kinds of collaborations between fact-checkers and platforms, they ensure an approach that is completely in line with the European Convention on Human Rights, because you don't have the removal of content. You actually have more speech being put online instead of fact-checkers or platforms removing the content. So you don't even have an interference with the subject's rights. So these were the conclusions, both from legal and policy sides and from the broader literature review. And if anyone has any questions or feedback, thank you.
Yeah, as to our practice, and just one pressing question, then come back to our last speaker. So any pressing question? One question. Oh, yes. All right. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Juliana. That's like a brilliant research, a good systematic literature review. I'm just curious, and maybe you haven't seen this on the papers, but regarding the transparency of the collaboration, I'm just curious if you know, like, for instance, how Meta handles it. Like, I would like to know specifically whether we know that some content has been removed because of fact-checkers, like if Meta is open about it, and whether maybe, for instance, when the oversight board orders Meta to do something, do they rely on fact-checkers, and that's more like that collaboration is more transparent? I wonder. Thank you.
Thank you for your question, Luz. I'm going to answer this, but I know this answer from my own research and from interviews that I carried out with fact-checkers, not from this paper specifically. So from my interviews with fact-checkers, one of the main points of concern is that they do not have this kind of transparency. So Meta used to provide them with reports in the past, but even the reports were not that transparent. So they were still very much in the dark as to the consequences of their fact-checks in the end. And this was one of the main points of concern for them, and one of the main points that they tried to address with Meta in the past was for these reports to be more transparent, especially because it would be a good weapon, let's put it that way, against the discourse of Zuckerberg that, you see, they are just censoring everyone, and also that they are not very efficient in what they do. They have these, of course, these numbers. We just don't know exactly how they operate. And in terms of the oversight board, I don't remember seeing any decisions that consider fact-checkers or their work, but I think that's definitely a really good and interesting point. I think it's because they have more of a international law framework in their decision, and we don't have anything necessarily on mis and disinformation from an international law perspective, like a convention or anything. I think they don't consider that in detail.
Okay, thank you for your question. And yes, sometimes we have our legal hypotheses, but how to justify. So thank you, excellent speech So you use something survey, use some interaction, and something original, something really rigor. Great. So let's move to last but not least. I can see Benjamin there. So it's your floor, Benjamin. Thank you. Just check the device. And
hi, thanks so much for having me. I'm going to share my screen because I think that's probably the easiest way. 1 second, sorry. Here we go. So I'm going to quickly present about an ongoing work which should be hopefully published towards the end of this year. And this is something I've been working on Instagram, so mostly focused on short-form video on social media, particularly Instagram Reels. And I'm going to be talking about what I'm calling an effective discursive ecology, which I'll explain what that is as I go. So essentially I wanted to look at how far-right content circulates as it's becoming more and more mainstream. And there's quite a lot of research to show that support for far-right projects is increasing, especially with young men, and the main sources of political news and political acculturation for young people, at least in Europe, is social media, and probably in most places by this point. And essentially, there's quite a lot of research already about how
sorry, could you check your device? We cannot hear you. Maybe mute. So, or internet access issue, maybe. Sorry, Benjamin. Can you check your device whether you mute by accident?
Very evident in social media and through Instagram. So, in order to investigate this area, I used a few different theoretical points. I started off thinking about Roth et al.'s definitions of mainstreaming. They propose lots of specific mainstreaming strategies used by extreme groups. An important part of this is mimetic communication and the participative community aspect of this. Also the idea of multimodal meaning making, which is where the different modes like the music, visual and sonic aspects, gesture and many other aspects contribute together to create meaning alongside the effects, of course, of algorithms and platform logics and things like effective publics, which I'll talk about more later. And the key concepts that I'm looking at here are the effective discursive ecology, which I'm going to define on Instagram. And this is essentially a way of describing how the ideological messaging combines with effective messaging, so emotionally, messaging which elicits an emotional response. That could be outrage or it could be something positive like pride. And these work together alongside the kind of inherent logics and systems of the platforms and how these encourage and contribute to and co-constitutively create this effective discursive ecology, which has a significant effect on making far-right and extreme propaganda effective and making it spread and making it shareable, making it convincing and persuasive. So the interaction between these different modes and these different aspects is basically what allows these projects to be so successful in convincing people. So this is a bit wordy, this slide, but essentially this is the research questions I looked at in this paper. How do the far right and their adjacent users on Instagram mobilize positively valence emotional effects, so things like humor, irony, and pride and belonging and things like this to make their content appealing? And how is this affected by algorithmic recommendation systems? And I'm going to talk about this second R-Cube2 later. Essentially, it's the idea that content which is not initially associated with the far right can be made political by its proximity to explicitly far right messaging and the way it's presented by algorithms. To look at the methodology briefly, I used algorithmic ethnography, digital snowball sampling, research personas method. Essentially, the idea is you just create researcher accounts and radicalize them with interaction, and eventually you access a kind of a pipeline or a feed which is radicalized and which shows you exclusively extreme content, far-right content, or associated content. And this was analysed with multimodal discourse analysis and iconographic and iconological methods to understand the symbolism and the iconography and things that were going on. The data was 2,603 Instagram Reels in a kind of iterative, evolving data set from 2 different researcher accounts between February to November 2025. And this was inherently transnational because the content that was suggested was mostly Anglophone, maybe 95% Anglophone, but it was from all different sources, from the UK, from the US, from Australia, Canada, all across Europe. But also, interestingly, a lot of it comes from sock puppet accounts, so accounts which claim to be in London or Ireland or wherever, but are actually located somewhere completely different. That might be Americans pretending to be Irish people to spread Islamophobia in Ireland, for example, which there's significant research showing that to be the case. Or it could be somebody in Nigeria or Bangladesh creating a white supremacist account for financial motivations, because you can obviously earn money on social media through viral content if it gets a lot of traction. So yeah, it's pretty complex. There are even like financial motives increasing the spread of this stuff within the platform logics, but also external to that. So through my observations, I came up with this, what I called an effective discursive typology, in order to describe 3 overlapping, coexisting modes of far-right effective discursive strategy. We can call it strategy or just kind of the modes through which they communicate, and the kind of emotional manipulation that they try to use in these different ways. Bear in mind, these are not sequential, they're not always separated, they're just descriptive, analytical, but they often overlap. Often one item will feature several of these modes, and these are all strongly mediated by the algorithms. And bear in mind that because the algorithms are so opaque and black boxed, it's really difficult to understand how this works, and we can only really interpret it from observation. So the first one that I've identified here is where the far right will use humor, irony, and meta-reflexivity. So these are things, I've not left an example here, but these are memes and reels which are humorous or ironic, and this has several benefits for spreading this ideological messaging. It allows plausible deniability, so you can say I was just joking after you share it, or it can be ambiguous, which might make people who are not actually aligned with far-right ideology more likely to share it, which increases the spread, or it might act as a kind of soft entry point into more radical or more reactionary online communities where people enter because of jokes and irony and self-parody and end up immersed in a more ideological space which can radicalize them or normalize these ideas for them. And this also has a significant, pretty significant in-group signaling role and an acculturation role where communities are built and fortified and strengthened based on the humor and the edgy, ironic kind of play that people are involved in online. There's another mode which I've identified, which is wholesome and nostalgic aestheticization. So quite a lot of this far-right and white supremacist and conservative propaganda imagery has a kind of wistful, nostalgic, kind of beautiful aspect to it, where it tries to present things like beautiful landscape imagery or nice imagery of traditional scenes and femininity and mythology in a kind of soft, positive way. And there's a lot of examples of this in the literature as well, of this being used to widen the audience and to make people feel a sense of affiliation and connection to these far-right projects, but also a sense of loss, like showing beautiful, lost, idyllic, ancient or even like 1950s European or American societies, maybe a family having a barbecue in the 1950s, everyone's smiling. everyone white, of course. In all of these images, everyone is white. And the idea is to create a kind of soft, peaceful, serene imagery to give something worth fighting for, which is a phrase they use a lot. And essentially, yeah, this reframes extremism as innocence, harmony, beauty, unity, something lost, something worth fighting for, protecting. And then we have another mode which is more aggressive and martial and rousing, where content is framed as heroic or about being proud of your civilization and proud of being from a warrior civilization. This might be things like marching soldiers or Romans or Celtic soldiers or Vikings or whatever, with epic soundtracks, and it's kind of, and often also Nazi soldiers or just imagery which has a kind of warlike feel, and it's meant to kind of inspire a call to action, mobilize people, make people have a sense of aspiration and destiny. And these all work together, these three modes, and they kind of have different roles, and there's no clear, obvious pipeline of how they work together in a specific sequential order. But for example, the humour aspect can really draw people into more extreme discourse. The wholesome mode can make people attached to this ideological position and have a sense of something to guard or something lost. And this inspirational mode might inspire people towards action, inspire people to be more politically active for these reactionary, hateful projects. Something quite important I've observed in this as well, I think, is the fact that algorithmic proximity plays an important role. So things like non-ideological and ostensibly neutral content is presented surrounded by ideological content. So you might have, for example, a reel talking about how the bad guys won World War II, the good guys lost World War II, right? So lamenting the defeat of the Nazis, saying that Hitler was a great guy, he was misunderstood, blah, blah, blah. And this might be followed by some documentary clip about how the Luftwaffe, German Air Force, was so effective, or how German engineering was so good. Just these kind of apolitical posts are connected by proximity and adjacency to the ideological posts, and you end up with a really full, effective discursive ecology, or this feed, which is just constantly reinforcing itself at different valences, right? One of the important things here is that it makes this messaging become ambient and surround the user and the public at all times, but it also sends the messaging with different levels of extremity. So you may have a little edgy, slightly racist joke, or you might have something which just makes the Nazis look effective and impressive in a kind of neutral documentary way, and then gradually you will be exposed to explicit white supremacist neo-Nazi propaganda, and these kind of work together to build a bigger audience or to normalize or acculturate people into this. And this makes extremism more ambient and familiar, is what I suggest from this. So just quickly talk about the key findings in a really simple way. Essentially, this extreme far-right ideology appears to circulate through emotion rather than argument, though there are kind of more deliberately argumentative clips. It's mostly about just making people outraged or proud or making people laugh, and that way normalizing discourse and bringing people into these communities. And I think in many ways the positive ones, like the sense of belonging and pride or humor, has a pretty significant effect. It makes people less tired and fatigued than watching just fear-based, crime-based, or violence-based content all the time. And this really increases the shareability and resilience of this content online. And also, when it's soft, aestheticized, wholesome or humorous content, this makes it harder to moderate, and it makes it less likely to be picked up on by automated systems, even in the limited extent that they exist. The implications of this, well, it's something to take into account for moderation. It's not just about finding explicit hate speech anymore. These deeply harmful, dangerous ideologies are spread not just through explicit hate speech, and it makes it a lot harder to moderate, but it's important we need to find ways around this and address this through digital literacy and other methods. So just to quickly conclude, and I hope people have some questions because I've gone through this quite quickly, I think. Instagram, I suggest, operates as an effective discursive ecology where various modes, various different forms of emotion and effect, along with the logics of the platforms and the algorithmic amplification, co-create this ecosystem, this ecology, which is very, very conducive to radicalization or to the propagation of extreme reactionary ideologies. And it's kind of a self-fulfilling vicious cycle, both through deliberate participation by users, but also, of course, the platform logics. Important in this and understudied in this are things like humor, nostalgia, inspiration, which help to normalize extremism. And also this is part of a wider content analysis, which is used to inform ongoing larger projects involving panel surveys, longitudinal analysis, computational analysis, focus groups with audiences, and these are all things that we're actually doing already in the domain project, and things like this paper here are part of a content analysis to inform that. So last slide here, if you want to read about the project, you can look on the domain website here. Feel free to write me an email, and feel free to reach out on LinkedIn. So here, I'm not sure.
So excellent, Benjamin. I think it's a great talk. And also like one question, to be fair, for Benjamin. Then we come back to the panel Q&A generally. Just one pressing question for Benjamin? Yes, the lady. Yeah, that's fine. Just a moment, like microphone. Quick. Yeah, thank you.
Can you hear me now? Yes. Firstly, thank you for the interesting presentation, Benjamin. I wanted to ask a little bit about the method. So you used radicalized researcher accounts. So I wanted to ask how was the accounts radicalized, and also was that fast, or did it take a long time because you collected data over, I think, 6-7 months? And also, do you think this reflects a realistic social media environment that a person could actually end up in? Thank you.
Right, I think I recognize that voice. Thanks for the question. Yeah, so with the research persona method, it's kind of a little bit complicated to make it extremely systematic and to track everything because of the opacity and black box nature of the algorithms. However, by pulling little threads or accessing like kind of seed content, so looking at hashtags or keywords, it's what you can do is kind of find a little thread which allows access through snowball sampling into like a radicalized milieu. Obviously, none of these online communities have a kind of stable shape. They're all fluid and they change algorithmically in kind of unpredictable or difficult to analyze ways. But after a certain point of engaging with content via seed accounts or just scrolling, and for example, as a man of my age, I'm on personal social media accounts, I'm often exposed to far-right propaganda. It does also depend on gender, it depends on location, depends on age, all of these things. But from exposure to some of these, or from using seed accounts or seed content or hashtags or keywords, we can kind of create an algorithm which very rapidly becomes almost entirely full of extreme content. So it's quite quick to access. It takes longer to gather all the data and to analyze it, of course. So I did it in various sessions over several months. The question of whether it's realistic, it's difficult to say. There are definitely some people who are exposed to a huge deal of this radical content, but we didn't analyze audience reception, and we didn't analyze this in a massive computational way, so it's impossible to make specific definitive claims about this. but I do think that this, the popularity, for example, the engagement metrics on this content suggests that it's very widespread. For example, a lot of the content will have 1 million likes or thousands of shares for an explicit neo-Nazi post, right? So the stuff is, which, I mean, we can't tell what's bots and what's real, but there's definitely quite a widespread popularity to this, which means a lot of people see it, which means it's very present online. So yeah, I mean, realistic might not be the word, but representative to some degree is definitely the case.
Thank you, Benjamin. Thank you for your question as well. So really lucky to have a very fine panel. Really would like to learn from them more, but in terms of time, so let's have a very quick round of QA. I hope like you ask question, like to be very concise. So we just have a quick round. So yeah, any quick questions to be concise? Okay. If not, I would like to ask my panel members, and each of you, I would like to give you 30 seconds. Just try to pass your strongest message to our audience, and just like to not summarize or key findings. Can we start from Professor Carla? Carla, please.
So, my key message. Sorry, very quickly. My key message is that responses to prejudice disinformation, as I ended up saying, must require collaboration, coordination between key actors of the digital ecosystem. We cannot rely either on regulatory responses only or voluntary mechanisms. We cannot rely only in educational methods, or even, although very necessary, in fact checking, because we need a coordinated and integrated response, because the problem that we are studying is too complex and exceeds national borders, and so.
Thank you very much. So let's move to Juliana, please.
Thank you very much. I think I'm just going to continue exactly what you just mentioned and just expand it to academia, because of course the problem of not only hate speech but misinformation, disinformation, information disorder in general is extremely complex, and I think we should bridge gaps in between disciplines too, because we've heard from many lawyers, but we've also heard from people in different disciplines, and I think the more we talk in between these disciplines and collaboratively, the more we can actually understand the issue and try to propose different solutions. So I'd say my final message is continue to talk to one another, continue to try to develop different solutions, and let's think creatively, because I think this is such a big problem that I think it deserves creative solutions. But unlike our previous panel, I would like to end up in a happy note or something like that, to say I think there should be solutions, yes, we just need to talk more.
Sorry, can I just add something?
Yes, please, but be concise.
Yes, sorry. And yes, to finish, because I think this is also a key message, the responses that we give, we need to try to protect our fundamental rights, because a problem that I found when studying these responses given is that when trying to confront disinformation, where it's possible in the end to prejudicate or to erode the freedoms that we are in origin trying to protect. So I draw on her reflection, on my colleague's reflection. It's very important to continue talking and educating and protecting our fundamental rights.
Thank you, Carla. So let's move to Professor Dr. Kezban from University of Utrecht. I didn't introduce, please.
Yeah, we focus on generally in the journalists, Turkish journalists in exile, and these topics they had a so huge area from the social media and some digital new media accounts, but at the same time the government from Turkey uses these techniques, and generally the government has a little bit and a huge area from the for money of under contact network, and the last time and this government used and so big area on the Twitter, and they had again they both on soldier and the bot account and the actual bot accounts, and it is so big risk about this exile journalists in this case. And they need a lot of new network in the new country, but they have a limited time and limited energy in the news. The immigrant case, they have the digital diaspora. They have now so big official diaspora. The official diaspora contact with the general the national diaspora, but in this case they have a not national diaspora of and the typical diaspora. They get contact with the digital diaspora, and this digital diaspora is a little bit different from the old diaspora system, because in Europe a lot of Turkish person living here, but this Turkish person got contact with these journalists in the exile, because they are an agent, they are an client of others, and other person, and generally, and this speak of this gender from the Iran. And in this case, we can look like a new counter effect from after the exile process. How can they keep contact with the new network of digital diasporas in this new case? In this time and this case, they have so minimal and so limited contact with the new diasporas of new contact from the other and the main country. This is where our they need a really big and specific network in this case, because the hate speech area is so huge and so dramatically strong. This is, yes, the one.
Thank you, Kezban. Benjamin, we just talk about online hate speech and offline problem implications. So yours, online talk, and we to circle the impact. So wonderful talk, and great value added to our panel. So it's the last but not least. So 1 minute, you are online. Can you share your key findings briefly?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yep. Okay. Yes. So I suppose my last point would be that looking at the effective discursive ecology idea that I've been talking about, really an important aspect of this is that the platform is not some neutral or passive tool that we can use as we please, and it's something which really intrinsically lends itself to the spreading of the propagation of really extreme far-right messaging and propaganda, and the radicalization of people into these ideologies. And I think if we want to be serious about addressing the rise of the far-right across Europe and further, we really need to look at the ownership structures and logics that allow this to be the case. If we allow far-right American billionaires to own our social media platforms and to do as they please in a mostly unregulated way across Europe, then this is going to keep getting worse. There's not much we can do with small-scale online interventions. I think as academics, we should be advocating for a change in this.
Excellent, Benjamin. Best luck for your project. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, so we come to the end and for the last panel. So please, could you join me thank our panel members? Excellent job.
to this session. In his place, we are very grateful to Dr. Zoe Grossi from Leuven, who for kindly stepping in and sharing a short reflection with us. So, Dr. Zoe Grossi, you have the floor.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Let me first start by emphasizing that I will try to fill Professor van der Lendel's shoes, and let me emphasize the word try here. So we have now come to the end of the conference, Echoes of Hate, Digital Communication, Populism, and the Regulation of Hate Speech. We would like to begin to express our sincere gratitude to everyone who made this conference possible. So the Research Institutes of Human Rights and Context at Ghent University, the Navarro Institute of Human Rights at the University of Oxford, the Human Rights Implementation Center at the University of Bristol, the Institut de Droit Humain at the University of Valencia, and the Wallenberg Institute of Human Rights and Humanitarian Law in Sweden. And of course, solidarity with others who consistently managed to organize a highly structured and intellectually rich conference. Then we would also like to thank our speakers for bringing such diverse perspectives on the discussion of hate speech, ranging from a legal analysis and political theory to media studies, psychology, gender studies, and comparative approaches. That diversity has been one of the greatest strengths of this conference. One of the key lessons we can draw from today is that in the current political and digital climate, this conference is still necessary, and perhaps even more necessary than ever. Hate speech continues to be one of the most pressing threats to democratic societies, and digital communication has and will continue to intensify this threat. The structure of online platforms enhances the visibility of messages that provoke strong emotional reactions, resulting in hateful or divisive content, to often circulate faster and more widely than thoughtful and nuanced discourse. Digital spaces are thus powerful areas where conflicts can escalate and vulnerable groups can become the target of hostility. We see this in real life. Racist comments are being directed at athletes on social media platforms, online harassment of journalists reporting on migration, war, or occupation topics is being coordinated, and misogynist campaigns force women in politics, academia, and media to retreat from public debates. Several presentations today underscored how populist narratives intensify online hate. As evidence, populist leaders often construct a sharp divide between the people and the enemies of the people, portraying minorities, immigrants, or political opponents as threats to the nations. These narratives again create grounds for negative stereotypes and legitimize hostility. In some cases, this online hostility spills over into real-world discrimination, intimidation, and even physical violence. The presentations today made one thing unmistakably clear. Online hate does not happen in isolation. It is not confined to comment sections of digital platforms. In contrast, it shapes democratic elections, undermines trust in institutions, intimidates journalists, silences women, and targets minorities. The European Union, through instruments like the Digital Service Act, signals a growing recognition of platform responsibility. Yet, as multiple presentations in our first panel today on governing hate online showed, Legal frameworks alone are not sufficient and face significant challenges, such as the fact that the definitions of hate speech remain contested, enforcement is uneven, and on top of that hate speech is deeply embedded in the decision of private actors with enormous influence. Legal measures are essential, but they cannot operate in isolation. In our second panel on populism, it was demonstrated how hate can be strategically used for political purposes, such as mobilizing supporters, delegitimizing opponents, and normalizing exclusionary rhetoric. In addition, our third session on gendered hate highlighted the specific ways in which misogynist and anti-gender movements shape far-right discourse. This panel on gendered hate made it painfully clear that misogyny is not a side issue, but one of the most persistent and organized forms of online hostility today. Our fourth panel on media journalism and countering hate narratives emphasized the dual role of journalists and civil society actors, showing that they can challenge disinformation and hate, yet also that they are often vulnerable to the very harms they seek to counter. It also highlighted the important role of fact-checking initiatives to verify claims and prevent the spread of false and hateful narratives. Meanwhile, our fifth panel on emotion, psychology, and human experience of hate revealed how hate speech is felt at a deeply personal level, shaping fear, identity, and belonging, and sometimes resulting in lasting real-world consequences, such as exclusion from public life. Finally, the sixth panel provided broad perspectives showing how online hate emerges and is addressed in different contexts, from Turkey, China, and Latin America to Europe, reminding us that the fight against hate requires international comparative understanding and cooperation. Taken together, all these panels show that responding to online hate requires dialogue across disciplines and sectors, such as law, technology, media, psychology, and policy. All these areas must speak to one another. There are no simple solutions, but inaction is not an option. As we close, we would like once again to thank all the speakers, panelists, organizers, and participants for their engagement and insights. And let's hope that this conference and the resulting edited volume will not only serve as an academic contribution, but also as a tool for continued reflection, debate, and action. The echoes of hate are loud in today's digital spaces, but through research, dialogue, and cooperation, we can ensure that voices committed to human dignity, democratic values, and pluralism continue to be heard just as clearly. Thank you very much.
It has been a very interesting day, but also very long, so I'll be very short. As we come to the end of this conference, I would like to take a moment to express my appreciation. First, I would like to thank all our speakers for their intellectual generosity and thoughtful contributions. The diversity of perspectives, disciplines, and contexts represented here has greatly enriched our discussions and challenged us to think beyond familiar frameworks. I am particularly pleased to have organized this event with our colleagues, Professor Ifhak from Human Rights in Context of the University, Dr. Elisa Bechtold from Bonavero Institute of Human Rights, University of Oxford, Dr. Vedat Demir from the Freie Universität Berlin, Germany, Dr. Zoe Grossi from Leuven Center for Global Governance Studies, Leuven, the Human Rights Implementation Center at the University of Bristol, and Solidarity with Others. This collaboration reflects a shared commitment to advancing knowledge and fostering dialogue on human rights issues. My thanks also go to all of you, the attendees. The success of this conference is due not only to those who spoke, but also to those who listened, questioned, and engaged so actively throughout the sessions. Last, but certainly not least, I would like to offer my special thanks to the people supporting us from the background. In particular, I would like to acknowledge our colleagues from Solidarity with Others, Ali Khan, Beisa, and Cunha, and from Human Rights in Context, Alessandra, whose coordination and support were essential throughout the preparation and delivery of this academic event. Your efforts made it possible for everything to run so smoothly. I hope the conversations begun here will continue beyond this event, leading to new collaborations and shared initiatives. Thank you once again for being part of this conference. I wish you all safe travels and look forward to meeting again in the future. Thank you very much.